I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for September the 29th, 2025. We certainly have a lot of things going on right now. We have a lot of news to sort through from the weekend before going live. Prime Minister Netanyahu was at the White House with President Trump, and already there are a lot of people who are responding to what is taking place. We will be covering some of that later in our news roundup. Probably won't be until tomorrow when we get into a lot of the responses, a lot of the reactions to the different peace proposals and negotiations, etc. Okay, so I hope that many of you over the weekend on Saturday, my sister Jane McKee Ferguson and I had a special Family Unfiltered report on the death of Charlie Kirk. If you have not already, do go watch or listen to that. Hopefully, this is the start of many such special reports. And we're already working behind the scenes to figure out what the next one is going to be. So we've got a lot going on from the weekend. But first, and we do this every Monday, if you have not, please do subscribe to the blog notifications, messianicapologetics.net. You can find this in the right-hand column. Be automatically notified by email when Messianic Apologetics is updated. So you just put your email address in there, hit subscribe, and then you will be asked to confirm. That's different from our email update list, which you can subscribe to by clicking on the envelope icon right there. Those are specific updates we have to put together. All right, so let's get into our theology roundup. Our material is taken from our ministry publication. There we go. Taken from our ministry publication, the Messianic Torah Helper. And this is a resource which commonly gets kind of overlooked compared to our resource, the New Testament Validates Torah, kind of our flagship book. The Messianic Torah Helper is a valuable compilation of articles and analyses designed to assist you, your family, and your friends in approaching those important areas of the Torah which need to be considered. So among the different aspects in this resource, there are many different aspects regarding the subject matter of the Torah for today's broad Messianic movement to consider. These range from the validity of the Torah or law of Moses, the historicity and reliability of the Torah, the degree of applicability of the Torah to Jewish and non-Jewish people, the role of tradition in following the Torah, and natural changes affected to the role of the Torah in the post-resurrection era via the sacrifice of Yeshua. Some of these aspects surrounding Messianic study and appreciation of the Torah are handled quite well by the current generation, and some of them are frequently avoided or handled rather poorly. So we're going to be getting into some of this today, specifically in a discussion on apodictic and casuistic law. Certainly, if you have been in some kind of Old Testament studies, even some kind of Tanakh studies in Judaism, you probably have heard at some point or another the terms apodictic and casuistic used. But these are not necessarily terms you're going to hear within the Messianic sphere of influence, unfortunately. Many people within today's Messianic sphere of influence, and I mean this with all the love and respect in the world, and wanting to rightfully have a theological foundation in Moses' teaching. okay? Understanding the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, as the foundation of the rest of Holy Scripture. They tend to read the Torah as though it is somehow timeless, when it is not. As important as the Torah is, its original audience was who? The ancient Israelites getting ready to enter into the promised land. And of course, when you begin to factor that into your interpretation, into your hermeneutics, you recognize very quickly that there are instructions which can only be best understood for what they meant to the ancient Israelites in the ancient Near East. Of course, for all generations of God's people, a lot of these instructions, whether they pertain to technology, economy, etc., they doubtlessly teach us about God's character and God's workings in history. But you cannot just pick up, start studying the Torah and act as though every single one of its commandments is timeless, when it is very clear, as valid and relevant as its instruction is. You have to interpret it for its original audience first before you deduce principles for today. And then, of course, you have to understand its principles in the context of the wider narrative of salvation history. What happens when Israel enters into the promised land? What do you do with the 2 exiles? What do you do with Second Temple Judaism? And then what do you do with the completed work of Yeshua on the tree of sacrifice? So these are all things which do play into our interpretation of Moses' teaching. And a big part is being able to sort through what are commonly classified as apodictic or casuistic laws. All right, so we're going to switch screens to an excerpt from the Messianic Torah Helper, specifically the chapter entitled Avoiding the Frequent, excuse me, let me get this right. Addressing the frequently avoided issues Messianics encounter in the Torah, because there are a lot of frequently avoided issues we encounter in the Torah if we are completely honest with ourselves. Frequently encountering things pertaining to technology, economy, even ethics, and really wanting to have a better sense of what did these mean for the ancient Israelites set against other ancient Near Eastern law codes, where we find, oh my goodness, ancient Israel's law code very subversive, even a little progressive at times compared to other ancient Near Eastern law codes. That doesn't tend to be an approach you see in the Messianic community. We tend to run off to the rabbis before we get into the original audience first paradigm, which is where we're supposed to be. So we're going to cover some of this. I only have about 3 pages I'm going to go through here. This should go very quickly. It is sad to say this, but the Jewish synagogue, which does not acknowledge Yeshua as the Messiah, often has a better handle on what commandments in the Torah can and cannot be followed today than much of the Messianic community does. The very question of halakha, you've all heard this term before, meaning the way to walk in the Jewish theological tradition, arose precisely because people found themselves in circumstances and situations to which the Torah did not directly apply. In order to afford the Torah the authority which it has for God's people, Jewish innovation had to step in and determine which commandments could be followed in new circumstances and what could actually be done. Most of these new circumstances include living in the diaspora and how changes in both technology and economy affected the relevance of various commandments. So I want to make it clear there is a place for the rabbinic tradition, but we can't just run off to it before we sort through various commandments for what they meant for ancient Israel in the ancient Near East. While God's ethical and moral standards remained constant, as does his instructions on what were to make Israel a unique people, a good feature of the rabbinic tradition is its testimony to the fact that not all of the commandments are applicable for today. And that is without recognizing Yeshua as the Messiah who atoned for the world. The fact that halakha has to be something which adapts to the times is clear even within the biblical period. The Torah specifically commanded that Passover was to be celebrated in the place of the Lord's choosing. Deuteronomy 16:16, that place being Jerusalem. And indeed, there is adequate biblical testimony that many did expel the effort to go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, including Yeshua's own family. Luke 2:41-43. Yet, Acts 20 verse 6 indicates how the Apostle Paul commemorated the Passover and unleavened bread in Philippi. Would this have been considered a legitimate Passover celebration according to the Torah? If one has a strict black and white reading of the text, no. If one sits firmly within the Jewish theological halakha, yes. It was one thing for Yeshua's family to travel to and from Galilee to Jerusalem to commemorate the Passover. But for Jews living as far east as Persia or as far west as Spain in the first century, it would have just been impossible to go to Jerusalem for all three of the pilgrimage feasts. Accommodations had to be made, and the local synagogue would undoubtedly be a place of gathering for prayer and commemoration during these times for those who could not make the long journey. Recognizing that God is merciful to his people in those areas where they are unable to perfectly follow his law was also important. Understanding an historical reality like this is only a third of the difficulties which today's Messianics face when it comes to the commandments of the Torah and their applicability. Another third comes in the form of how the Torah's commandments are specifically classified. So this is the point I really wanted to make to you today. The Reformed Christian tradition has often subdivided the Pentateuchal ordinances between moral, civil, and ceremonial, with the latter two no longer being applicable because of Yeshua's sacrifice. While rightfully believing that the Torah's moral or ethical statutes can never be revoked and were upheld by Yeshua and the apostles, this threefold division is rather artificial, as a reading of the Torah itself indicates a much more organic division, as commandments applying to males, females, children, priests, farmers, business persons, married, unmarried, etc., are to be followed by those sectors of society. Some commandments apply to all, and then other commandments apply to only certain people. Even when Bible readers recognize these much more natural divisions among the Torah mitzvot, there has not been a great deal of Messianic engagement with what scholars often refer to as Apodictic or Casuistic laws. Torah commandments, listen very carefully here, please, which would be considered apodictic are most often those with some kind of thou shalt not attached to them, indicating that they are immutable principles which cannot, at least easily, be amended or revoked. They concern things which remain constant for the sake of God's people and in making them holy and set apart as he has called them out to be. The Ten Commandments are clearly in this category, as are many other ordinances which can be easily followed today with a minimum of difficulties. Other than the ethical and moral ordinances of the Pentateuch, which the historic Christian church has always held dear, they include many of the things which have helped constitute Jewish identity and continuance over the centuries. Now, this is where things get interesting. In contrast to this, casuistic laws or case laws include those things which clearly have some kind of timestamp on them. An excellent example of this is Deuteronomy 23:23, which says, "No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord." New American Standard. indicating that the 11th generation could very well enter into the Kahal Adonai. However, there are other casuistic types of commandments in the Torah which are not as easily classified as such. They have to be examined on a case-by-case basis. And the interpreter who holds to the continued validity of the Torah has to ask if such commandments only concerned an ancient setting, economy, and technology level, certainly teaching us things about God's character and ancient Israel's uniqueness, or whether they more easily apply to all cultural settings and all generations. Okay, so there are various casuistic laws in the Torah, but they have to be examined on a case-by-case basis, and frequently there are going to be various clues given in the text, which indicates that, yes, these pretty much just pertain to an ancient Israelite setting. And they teach us about God's character, but we've got to be able to probe them more as philosophy than as things which are timeless. Reasoning through Torah commandments and those which are applicable or non-applicable will be very difficult for some sectors of today's Messianic movement. The Apostle Paul wrote Timothy, "We know that the law is good if one uses it properly." 1 Timothy 1:8, New International Version. Learning how to do this will be a challenge for some of today's Messianic people as they weigh, number one, the impact and changes inaugurated by Yeshua's atoning sacrifice, number two, the role of halakha in the Jewish theological tradition, and number three, whether a Torah ordinance is apodictic or casuistic. A great deal of controversy, if not experienced now, then certainly to be experienced in the future regarding the following the Torah, listen carefully, will not be focused around things like Shabbat, memorializing the appointed times, or kashrut. A great deal of the controversy surrounding following the Torah will regard those things in the Torah which directly concerned the ancient Near Eastern world to which Moses' teaching was originally given to Israel. How we deal with those things in our 21st century world could very well determine how our faith community rises or falls, at least in various areas of ministry and relevance. So now you know a little bit about apodictic and casuistic law. Apodictic being those principles which are immutable. We would associate things like the Ten Commandments, things which said that thou shalt not associated with them. But then there are other things which are casuistic. They are case law for ancient Israel in the ancient Near East. And they definitely teach us important things about God's character, his workings through history. But at the same time, they might also involve us having to do a little more investigation. What did this mean? And then from there, deduce principles. And certainly, of course, recognize God's concern for various sectors of ancient Israelite society. Admittedly, this does not tend to be a very strong area of Messianic's engagement with the Torah, I'm sorry to say. Too many people, about as far as they go, is to an Orthodox Jewish resource like the Art Scroll Chumash, among others, rather than try to get back to, okay, the Israelites, they've left Egypt, they're in an ancient Near Eastern culture. The Mesopotamians believe this, the Egyptians believe that, the Canaanites did this thing. What was their instruction communicating as they were being prepared to enter into the Promised Land? I mean, to a lot of Bible readers, that's pretty obvious stuff. But other people, it's not so obvious. Having a Torah foundation in one's theology does, I'm sorry to say, mean different things to different people. Some, it's like, yes, that instruction is foundational, but it's not all of God's revelation. And we've got to then understand what it means in the further narrative, Israel and Canaan, for the Israelite monarchy, for the divided kingdom, for the exile and post-exile, leading to Second Temple Judaism and the ministry of Yeshua and his completed work on the tree. Not everyone looks at the Torah as foundation with that wider narrative of events in mind, especially if you're on the Hebrew root side of the equation. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup. Let me switch screens really quickly. And once again, this has been taken from our ministry publication, the Messianic Torah Helper, which includes a lot of information on these kinds of things, and indeed includes information on subjects you do not commonly hear talked about in Messianic Torah studies or Bible studies for that matter. All right, so let's move on to our news roundup. We do the news reports after the theology roundup because the news is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. Now, looking back at what took place this weekend, the Middle East, what's happening with the peace negotiations, Israel, Gaza trying to release the hostages, end the fighting. That's gained a huge amount of attention for certain. Of course, we also saw the shooting of an LDS Mormon church in Michigan. Admittedly, I didn't follow that as closely as some of the Middle East stuff. We have ongoing developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And before going live, Prime Minister Netanyahu was at the White House with President Trump. All right, so before we get started, please, especially with Yom Kippur barreling down on us. Yom Kippur begins Wednesday night. I think last week I said it was on Friday, but what I meant, of course, was Thursday. I may have just said we're going to be remembering Yom Kippur in a week. But Yom Kippur does begin on Wednesday evening, the Day of Atonement. It's a fast day. It's the holiest day for observant Jews. It's a day taken very seriously within the Messianic community because even though we might profess that we have salvation in Yeshua, there's still plenty of things we need to corporately acknowledge, repent of. There are things we need to intercede for before our Creator God, involving peace between Israel, their Middle Eastern neighbors, release of the hostages, cessation of conflict in Gaza. Number two, the end of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, not an expansion of it. And number three, reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. Because, of course, while the Charlie Kirk assassination continues to be something people are talking about, we've got unfolding developments coming with Russiagate, with the Epstein files, and AutoPen, who knows what else. So there are a lot of things we definitely need to be taking before the Lord in prayer. And I'm sure tomorrow we're going to be sorting through more of the reactions to the Trump-Netanyahu meeting at the White House. All right, so all of these news stories, you'll be able to access these later today when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. So you can go read the articles in further detail. You can watch the different news clips, etc. All right, our first story. This is from Open Source Intel Defender, September the 26th. So this is Friday afternoon. U.S. President Donald J. Trump announces that he will be declassifying all records related to Amelia Earhart, an American aviation pioneer who disappeared over the Pacific Ocean while attempting to become the first female pilot to circumnavigate the globe in July of 1937. So there are a lot, of course, rumors which have circulated around the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. So much so, some of you all may remember that way back in the day, Star Trek Voyager even had an episode where she was abducted by aliens and taken all the way to the Delta Quadrant. I don't think that is what is going to be discovered. There's a lot of speculation. She ran off with her male companion. Others, she was spying for the U.S. government on Japanese intentions in the Pacific. All these different factors play in. We'll see what happens. But things are being declassified by the Trump administration. All right, tomorrow we have a big meeting. All these U.S. generals and admirals at Quantico in Virginia. People have been speculating about that. So Open Source Intel Defender on Friday afternoon said this. According to additional details about the meeting provided by CNN, the surprise gathering will allow Secretary Hegseth to describe the administration's reinvention of the Department of Defense as the Department of War and outline new standards for military personnel, with a White House official telling CNN it's meant to be a show of force of what the new military now looks like under the president. Sources state that the meeting is expected to resemble a pep rally where Hegseth will underscore the importance of the warrior ethos and outline a new vision for the U.S. military, with him expected to discuss new readiness, fitness, and grooming standards the officers are expected to adhere to and enforce. All right, so we've heard everything regarding, we've heard the spectrum of opinions and speculation regarding what this meeting at Quantico is supposed to be, ranging from, among other things, a huge number of military flag officers are going to find themselves fired because we're trying to cut back on wasteful spending in the military, to they're coming together so they can be briefed on the situation in the world and how we're on the brink of World War III with Russia. I mean, that's basically the spectrum of opinion. Here you see an opinion, well, it's just going to be a big giant pep rally with the Secretary of Defense or War describing the new orientation for the Department of War. And we're just wanting to let all of these flag officers know how much they're appreciated, and we want them to be on board with the new focus for the U.S. military. We'll see what happens, of course. Okay, so we are going to be tracing a number of news stories regarding the proposed peace agreement, Israel, Gaza, wanting to end the fighting. This is from the 26th of September, so this is from Friday afternoon, Breitbart. Trump, it's looking like we have a deal on Gaza. President Donald Trump told reporters on Friday that it's looking like we have a deal on Gaza, which he said would include the return of hostages still held captive by Hamas. Okay, so we do, from the very start of the October 7th, 2023 attacks, all of us have been praying for the release of the hostages. And certainly the people of Israel are tired of the fighting, regardless of where they stand on issues of Judea, Samaria, Gaza, etc. So we know that world opinion for Israel and even for the Jewish community has plummeted as a result of this conflict. I do ask you all to keep those factors in mind. Not everyone in Israel, or certainly not everyone in the West, adheres to a biblical worldview as it involves the promised land, but their motive is to want to stop the fighting and let some degree of peace begin. Of course, this is something which is unfolding, and can it play a role in the future end time scenario? Absolutely. And that's another thing people, certainly in the Messianic community, need to remember. Are we the end time move of God or not? If we're not, then we need to call ourselves a Jewish renewal movement, a movement which is solely interested in seeing Jewish believers be able to express a belief in Yeshua as the Messiah of Israel and retain their Jewishness. Then you need to cut prophecy completely out, which I think a lot of people would recognize as wrong. So with that in mind, if certain developments take place, which we don't totally like, or they get us upset, we need to start seriously factoring in how they play a role in the end time scenario. Okay, from open source intel, you can watch this clip. It is 12 seconds. Hamas leader Ghazi Hamad, where he says, look what's the benefit of October 7 now, when the whole world, if you look at the General Assembly yesterday, when about 194 people opened their eyes. And of course, he's talking about recognition of Palestine, thinking that the state of Israel is bad, they're these oppressors. So he's not backing down from what he perceives as the benefits of the October 7, 2023 attacks. Okay, this was rather interesting. This is from Visegrad 24. Some of you all are aware of the Starmer government in the United Kingdom working toward a digital ID for all British citizens. And this is the response of the president of El Salvador, Bukele. Bukele comments on Starmer's digital ID. Of course, he quotes from the book of Revelation. He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So, proposals to have a digital ID for all British citizens is responded to by another world leader as basically being the mark of the beast of the book of Revelation. And he's not the only one who did that either. All right, from Visegrad 24, this is from September the 26th. So Friday, Wall Street Journal reports that Trump is open to lifting the restrictions on the use of U.S.-made long-range weapons against targets inside Russia. And there's more we say on that. So that's the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. Could Ukraine have access to U.S. weapons which can strike deep into Russia? That's very, very unnerving. All right, so we know, especially now with rising anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism, and with the devolution of figures like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and various others, discussions about the influence of the Jewish community, the Jewish people on Western society are going to be on the rise and on the increase, whether we like that or not. And along with that, there are various influencers who are strong supporters of Israel, strong supporters of the Jewish community, have to respond to that. And so one response from September the 25th that came across my feed on X is this. This is from Aaron Prager, forwarding on a 3-minute video from Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager reacts to Megyn Kelly's frustration with some Jewish groups. So Aaron Prager has this to say. Some Jews are great. And he's a Jew, by the way. Some Jews suck. That's the reality. Just like some Christians are great and others suck. And to be clear, you can critique the Israeli government and not be anti-Semitic. Many Jews, in fact, do. Leftists think in black and white when it comes to groups of people. I have more in common with a person of any background, ethnicity, religion, who seeks to uphold Judeo-Christian conservative values than anyone who seeks to forward the Marxist left-wing agenda. This isn't controversial, but I guarantee some find it so. So yes, you can, even if you're a Messianic believer, believes God is not finished with Israel, the Jewish people, the state of Israel was founded in fulfillment of biblical prophecy, you can legitimately from time to time criticize the Israeli government. You can say they've gone too far, they are wrong, but if you're going to do so, you need to do so in the tradition of the prophets of Israel and in the tradition of open political democratic discourse. So, for myself, I would never criticize the government of Israel for something I would not similarly criticize the United States government, my own government, for. So there needs to be a fairness there, but Aaron Prager's remarks are appreciated. All right, here's a post also in response to Keir Starmer, and it's from Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, from our state right here. Forwards on a 45-second clip Prime Minister announces digital ID cards. So Ted Cruz says, the idea is not fully complete. People might lose their ID. If I might suggest, the government could mandate that the 18-digit number must be tattooed on their right hand and on their forehead. What could possibly go wrong? Question mark. Devil emoji. So yeah, this is, so you got two major political figures, President of El Salvador, U.S. Senator from Texas, associating this with the mark of the beast in Revelation. Okay, we got two stories. We're going to go back to back with this. This is from Tikkun International, final pastoral recommendation report. This is on the IHOP Kansas City situation. Of course, Tikkun Global, they are a Messianic Jewish ministry commonly associated with the Dan Juster. And here, the Roy's report picked up this as well. A new report from a team of pastors and abuse prevention experts has recommended that IHOP Kansas City founder Mike Bickle be permanently disqualified from ministry, citing unrepentant sexual abuse of at least 17 women and a pattern of cover-up at the 24/7 prayer ministry. So it is true that the IHOP Kansas City, Mike Bickle, it directly connects with Messianic Judaism, whether we like that or not. And this scandal, which of course broke about 2 years ago, then it led to various others throughout the course of 2023 and into 2024. So we had Mike Bickle, then later we had Robert Morris, then we had Steve Lawson, and then Michael Brown. So because of the smallness of the Messianic community, I've just told people, look, you've got to work through these matters yourself and on your own, but you don't need to be ignorant of them either. And God is trying to wake us up, shake our collective attention. And for myself, I've never been a part of IHOP Kansas City. I've never, while I agree in principle with the ongoing validity of the gifts of the Spirit, I have to fall back on my Wesleyan theological training at Asbury Seminary, where, yes, we had people at Asbury who were charismatic, Pentecostal, Church of God, Assemblies of God, etc. But no, we were told by a lot of instructors, including two professors who taught for a season at Oral Roberts, that, you know, we treat the Pentecostals and charismatics frequently as wayward brethren. Yes, we recognize they've made a difference, but the scandals are far too frequent throughout the Pentecostal and charismatic movements. And indeed, you know, I'm borderline this close to considering the charismatic movement as not being of the Lord. That is how serious I take these kinds of things. And look, I believe in the gifts of the Spirit. The Lord, you know, definitely shows me dreams and visions and things about the future. But the most important gifts of the Spirit are what? Love, joy, and peace. And if we don't have any of those, any of these other dramatic things, which, you know, is definitely tied into these kind of scandals, it doesn't mean that much. Sorry to say that. All right, from Open Source Intel Defender, this is from September the 26th, so this is still Friday. The U.S. State Department has announced that it will be revoking the diplomatic visa of Colombian President Gustavo Petro after he joined a group of demonstrators on a street in New York City earlier today and called for the West and the United States to stop supporting Israel. Petro, who is in the U.S. for the United Nations General Assembly, additionally called for American service members to disobey orders and rise up against President Donald J. Trump. Yes, that will get your diplomatic visa revoked. Absolutely. You know, it's one thing to express a political opinion. We need to stop supporting Israel. It's another thing for you to call on U.S. service members to rise up against the president. All right, so here we have our next story from Open Source. It's final. Trump's quote-unquote dreams shattered. Nobel Committee quietly removed Trump's name from Peace Prize nominee list. Yes, he can legitimately say that President Trump has been responsible for ending significant conflicts in the world, whether it was India and Pakistan, Cambodia and Thailand. He's working on Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. He's working on Russia, Ukraine. Don't expect Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize, even though he's been nominated for it by a number of leaders. Oh, yes, and I also forgot the one in Africa, the Congo, and Rwanda, I believe it was. I'm sorry. But yes, all these different conflicts. Don't expect Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize, which, even though there's a lot of speculation surrounding Trump that people think, especially with the Middle East, he is the beast, or he's going to give rise to the beast, we would expect the beast to get the Nobel Peace Prize. All right, so here's one from the White House on September the 26th. Friendly reminder, your favorite president saved TikTok. Of course, we are still waiting for the negotiated deal involving TikTok to materialize. But the whole idea was to get U.S. investors behind TikTok rather than the Chinese government or the Chinese to have a controlling share of TikTok, meaning that the Chinese government could have access or backdoor access to the private information of American citizens. We're still waiting on what's going to happen with TikTok. And of course, as it comes together, we will evaluate whether we want to rejoin that platform as Messianic Apologetics. We will see. We are active, of course, on social media, posting on YouTube, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter. So we'll see what happens with TikTok. All right, so what is going to happen in Gaza? Well, there's a lot of speculation, and here's a post from the Telegraph. Sir Tony Blair wants to run Gaza once the war between Israel and Hamas is over. Okay, so this is just one proposal. Of course, Tony Blair was the former British Prime Minister. Many of you probably remember some of the changes of the Blair government in the late 1990s and the turn of the millennium. And then since he left Downing Street, Tony Blair's been involved in a wide number of NGOs, that's non-governmental organizations. A lot of people in the Middle East don't like Tony Blair in the same way they don't like George W. Bush because of their complicity in the Iraq War. But we'll see if Sir Tony gets involved. Okay, here's a post ran across my feed on Instagram from Frank, and you'll need to watch this in further detail. But he talks about there are many different views when it comes to the rapture in the end times, but which one is correct? In the short video, Frank shares his thoughts on one of the more popular views, the pre-tribulation rapture. So watching through this, the main point event, which Frank Turek, and he was a mentor to the late Charlie Kirk, and he's an apologist a lot of people follow. And to his credit, he was there and he gave direct firsthand testimony to what he saw after Charlie Kirk got shot. And they got in the car and they were trying to go to the hospital. Turek is looking for what he labels from Romans 11:25. Listen very carefully if you've never heard this interpretation before. He is looking for the full number of the Gentiles to come to salvation. So a prominent view in dispensational, especially those influenced by Calvinistic soteriology, a Calvinistic view of salvation, they look at ta pleroma, ton ethnon, as the full number of the Gentiles coming in, meaning the full number of non-Jewish people from the nations at large who have been predestined to salvation coming into the kingdom. And when that hits, then the rapture happens. So that is Frank Turek's orientation for this. And it's going to be a view we have to engage with more and more frequently as Messianic people. Those who are Messianic people who have been influenced by dispensationalism, and to be polite, We do have some of them here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex because, after all, we do sit in the backyard of Dallas Theological Seminary. There are people who definitely adhere to that opinion. But we have to just keep this in mind, file it away, and recognize its influence on a lot of people we know. Okay, to the Charlie Kirk situation. This is a clip of Mrs. Erica Kirk, which is getting some circulation on social media. This is from September the 26th, still dealing with Friday. This is 2 minutes, 13 seconds. Erica Kirk says there are countless hours of speeches, interviews, etc. of Charlie Kirk that no one has ever seen. She also said Charlie left them the blueprints of what to do through 2030. Buckle up, Charlie's voice is just getting started. Of course, the biggest aspect of Charlie Kirk's death, which all of us are going to have to sort through, is his legacy. And this, if there are just hours upon hours of Charlie Kirk teachings, Charlie Kirk speeches, whatever it is, which have not seen release to the public or huge circulation to the public, this is going to constitute us sorting through his long-term legacy. Look, anybody who is a teacher, anybody who is an influencer, you've got projects which are ongoing. You've got open files on this, open files on that. I've got open files on this and that. And if, in the case of Charlie Kirk, you are taken out a little too soon, you still have those things out there. And what do you do with them? From time to time, I don't remember the theologian's name, but a number of years ago, a prominent British theologian, examiner from the late 19th century, all these private papers were uncovered. And some of them involved commentaries on particular letters of Paul, particular books of the New Testament. And so, what was to be done about these things? Were they to just stay in some kind of an archive which only scholars could access, or were they to be sorted through and published as books as they were intended to be before this theologian had passed away, before that could happen? So these are, reasonable questions. Every one of us has got files on something, things we haven't completed. Do we just keep them closed, or do they get open to the public? So that's what I think this is. All right, so this was the first report, the first major report from the weekend, from September the 27th. So Saturday, from the Times of Israel, revealed U.S. 21-point plan for ending Gaza war, creating pathway to Palestinian state. Steve Witkoff proposal envisions all hostages released in first 48 hours, grants amnesty for peace-committing Hamas members, encourages Gazans to remain, sees U.S. establish Israeli-Palestinian dialogue. And this is, of course, something which people are definitely going to be sorting through in the coming days. There are going to be aspects of it. Okay, I see the logic of that. There are going to be aspects of it. Okay, I don't like that, but I see that that might be a necessary concession. And there are going to be other aspects that they really don't agree with. Looking through these points, point number 5, once the hostages are returned, point 4, within 48 hours of Israel publicly accepting the deal, all living and deceased hostages will be returned. Once the hostages are returned, point 5, Israel will free several hundred Palestinian security prisoners serving life sentences and over 1,000 Gazans arrested since the start of the war, along with the bodies of several hundred Palestinians. Yeah, none of this. This is what happens in war. Okay, whether we like it or not. And there are going to be a number of other things. Point number 8, aid will be distributed without interference from either side by the United Nations and the Red Crescent, along with other international organizations not associated with either Israel or Hamas. Okay, these are things which they're trying to get to stop the conflict. Number 10, an economic plan will be created to rebuild Gaza through the convening of experts with experience in constructing modern Middle East cities and through the consideration of existing plans aimed at attracting investments and creating jobs. Okay, we definitely have seen that circulated throughout this conflict by the Trump administration. Point 13, Hamas will have no role in Gaza's governance whatsoever. There will be a commitment to destroy and stop building any offensive military infrastructure, including tunnels. Gaza's new leaders will commit to peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. Okay, so we'll just, of course, you can go and you can read all of these in greater detail later. And a lot of it involves seeing that the Palestinian Authority take a role in Gaza, not Hamas. All right, this is something which we knew was likely coming, some kind of a final peace deal. Of course, it comes during the 10 days of awe between Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, so the timing does not escape us. There are going to be people who respond differently to this in the Messianic and Christian world. If America forces this on Israel, we're going to be judged as a country. I've already been seeing that. Others are going to be like, well, if this is part of the end time scenario, then this was necessary. And then that could play into, well, is Donald Trump the beast? It's probably not Tony Blair. Is he going to give rise to the beast? I mean, all these kinds of factors are in play. But one of the things we have been praying for since the very start of this is the return of the hostages. And we know that the Gaza Strip is something which, yes, if you were a real estate developer like Donald Trump, this is a place which you would want to see redeveloped and made into an Arab Riviera type thing. So we will wait and see. Of course, when we started going live, Netanyahu and Trump were at the White House, and we're going to be sorting through tomorrow some of the responses and reactions to this. Okay, to the Russia-Ukrainian situation. This is from Saturday, September the 27th, open source intel. President Zelensky, Putin will not wait for the end of the war in Ukraine. He will open a new direction. No one knows which one. Right, referring to things like drones in Poland, drones in Romania, the Russian Air Force in Estonia. There have been some developments. There are a lot of different opinions in what's been taking place in Denmark. So, yeah, we just wait and see. Okay, here's a really big one, which definitely should concern today's Messianic people. And it's an 8-second clip. It's from someone who has a channel, Holy Orthodoxy, so it's Eastern Orthodox Christian and America First. This is obviously at some kind of church, probably charismatic. You see the Israeli flag, people are dancing and people are waving their hands. The question, is this idolatry? Now, there are people who responded to this saying, yes, it is. Israelolatry is something which has infiltrated the church, right, through dispensationalism. Some of you all know that narrative. Others were smart enough to say, I don't know what the context of this is in 8 seconds. Were they just praying for peace in Israel? Were they just praying for the release of the hostages? And, they had an Israeli flag in the background. But one of the things which has taken place since October the 7th is Christians on the right end of the spectrum in America, America First, they should have come to some kind of defense of Israel or saying, look, the hostage situation is terrible. We need to pray for their release. We need to pray for peace. Instead, it's rising anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, because, well, the church is the new Israel. And what is this, i.e. aberration in the Middle East? And we're going to continue to see that on the rise, and today's Messianic community needs to take notice of it, because you see it in posts like that. And that could have been any Messianic Jewish congregation. It could have been the Messiah Conference in Grantham, Pennsylvania. We need to take note of things like this. Here's another thing we've got to be aware of, very concerning. Okay, this is a post from Eitan Fischberger reposting something from Joel Webbin. Joel Webbin, in terms of the TikTok arrangement, is claiming, among others, that not the U.S. government, not U.S. companies who are trying to see U.S. control of TikTok. No. Number one, Israel buys TikTok. Number two, Netanyahu immediately meets with content creators in the U.S. That is true. He did meet with content creators in the U.S. because content creators on TikTok are overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian and pro-Arab. And then number three, he commissions them to fight against their fellow Americans in order to secure support for the state of Israel. And Joel Webbin, who is a replacement, he believes in replacement theology, a supersessionist, he says, as a Christian, you do not hate Israel enough. And so Eitan Fischberger rightfully responding, let me get this straight. China owns TikTok and the woke right doesn't care. But then an American Jew, that's Larry Ellison of Oracle, is set to become part majority owner of TikTok USA. And suddenly they're whining, oh my God, TikTok is controlled by Israel. Yeah, get your facts straight. But this kind of conspiracy, the Jews control everything. They control all the money. They control all the industry. Expect to see those on the woke right who promote supersessionism, expect to see those theories go through the roof. But no, you get on TikTok. I mean, TikTok, I'll be honest with you, TikTok has been a cesspool of, the far left. It's been just a cesspool of anarchy. That's the reason why Messianic Apologetics got off. All we got were comments from people, pro-Palestine, genocide, all these kinds of free Palestine, and then a whole lot of other inappropriate remarks, which I will not repeat. So hopefully the new TikTok will be more civil. Okay, from Visegrad 24, this is from the 27th of September. Russia launches one of the largest air attacks this war. Hundreds of suicide drones have been launched along with dozens of ballistic and cruise missiles by strategic bombers, MiG-31s, and the Black Sea Fleet. Millions of Ukrainians are sheltered. And I know some of us looking at this would like to ask President Putin, what are you doing? What did you do with President Trump in Alaska, and was that just completely meaningless? Okay, this is yesterday, September the 28th, Fox News. We will get it done. President Trump announces a possible breakthrough in Middle East negotiations, saying all are on board ahead of his meeting with Netanyahu at the White House Monday. And of course, we went live right as that meeting at the White House was taking place. Okay, next. From Rapid Response 47, there's a 1 minute, 49 second clip. VP, Vice President on TikTok deal. I believe that north of 80% of the company will be owned by the American investors. This is not something where the Chinese or any Chinese entity has a large stake of the table. The important thing about this deal is that the United States still has the ability to review the terms of the transaction and review the national security implications of the new entity. Not just over the next 100 days, but over the next many years. So I know a lot of people who have stayed off of TikTok, myself included, are going to be this very carefully. But yeah, we will wait and we will see. All right, from Fox News yesterday, and there is a 1 minute, 9 second clip. No one like him. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praises President Trump as an incredible friend and ally of Israel, pushing back against critics. I don't decide a thing for President Trump. He is the most independent leader, an amazing leader that I've seen in all my years. Because there are definitely people on the woke right. They claim that we saw Netanyahu having to hit back at Tucker Carlson. That Netanyahu controls Trump. Not if Netanyahu is having to agree to this 21-point plan put out by the Trump administration. No, no, no. Okay, that from the New York Post yesterday. Netanyahu expecting to make painful and significant concessions under Trump's ceasefire plan report. Israel will have to make painful and significant concessions under the U.S. plan to end the war in Gaza. The givebacks will run contrary to several recent policy positions by the Jewish state, especially a role for the Palestinian Authority in the post-war plan, Israeli television's Channel 12 reported. Yeah, whatever negotiated, whatever is finalized, there are going to be plenty of people on both sides who don't like it. That's just what happens in a war, okay? And I'm going to ask you to look at this big picture perspective from those who believe that we're getting closer and closer to the Messiah's return. Don't listen to a lot of the knee-jerk reactions. Look at it big picture from God's perspective. Is a Palestinian state a likely part of the end-time scenario, the covenant with many? Yes. Is Israel having to make concessions to their unfriendly neighbors likely a part of the end-time scenario? Yes. And if you think that that's going to bring negative repercussions on America or any other world powers who made this happen, then you need to recognize that ultimately, as a child of the King, you are citizens of the kingdom of heaven, and he will protect you and your family if you cry out to him the same way as he protected the first century believers from the Roman government. So please do keep that in mind. There are a lot of people who are not raising that factor for understanding what could be happening. Okay, from Open Source Intel, Vice President J.D. Vance. Complex discussions are currently taking place regarding Gaza. We want Hamas to no longer pose a terrorist threat to the state of Israel. So that is the main thrust of wanting to get some kind of a peace deal done. Okay, so here's a post yesterday, Rapid Response 47. There's a 36-second clip with the vice president. I think POTUS has been very clear. He actually wants Gaza to be controlled by the people who live there. He wants the West Bank to be controlled by the people who live there, and he wants the terrorist networks that are around the Israelis to be dismantled. Okay, so even if you don't totally like that, the goal of the U.S. government is to get the terrorists wiped out, eliminated, get them to stop. That's the main job of the U.S. government right now, and to stop the killing. Okay, so shifting toward American home front, and this is something about periodically as things have been made available. The New York City mayoral race. This is from yesterday, New York Post. Eric Adams drops out of New York City mayoral race amid increasing pressure. I know I cannot continue my campaign. So thus far in the mayoral campaign, there have been 4 candidates: Mamdani, Adams, Cuomo, and also Curtis Sliwa, whose picture is not there. So Adams knows he has no chance of winning. Maybe the progressives will be able to rally behind Andrew Cuomo. The Sliwa stand a chance. A lot of people are just expecting Zoran Mamdani, someone who's expressed support for radical left causes, frequently classified as a communist. They're expecting him to win. And of course, what makes this significant is, New York City is, the #1 city in America, has the largest Jewish population that outside of Israel. Likewise, economically, New York's very important city. All of these headquarters of world companies and banks and everything else. So if Mamdani is elected mayor of New York, there will be significant shifts which take place, not only involving the Jewish community, which is something the Messianic community follows very closely, but just also economics, society, etc. So we do have to keep this in mind. Okay, so here we have a read from Rabbi Brian Samuel on X, posting a 44-second clip from Dinesh D'Souza, where he is interviewing Jonathan Cahn. October 7 wasn't just an historic event, it was a biblical event, as we can see from the 4 colors of the apocalypse. Okay, that is an opinion, obviously, but here Brian Samuel says, this dude is bringing Messianic Judaism to the mainstream. Now, the other thing is, and we're just going to note this in terms of the comments, immediately below this, someone says that Rabbi Jonathan Cahn has frequently faced accusations of making false or unfulfilled prophecies, especially in the context of his popular books and presentations drawing parallels between ancient Israel and modern America. Yeah, like the Harbinger. There are people, and I've said this before when I've gone to MJAA events, there are people who that Jonathan Cahn is a prophet. They're Messianic Jewish leaders who believe he is a prophet. I do not believe Jonathan Cahn is a prophet. I have said I am a Jonathan Cahn skeptic. There are things I obviously will agree with him on. There are things I will not agree with him on. He is a fundamentalist. Everyone can recognize that. But whether we like it or not, even though it was Michael Brown a year ago before his drama hit, Jonathan Cahn is the world's most well-known Messianic Jew. And so with that in mind, we have to at least note these kinds of things where a significant influencer like Dinesh D'Souza interviews him. Okay, here's a useful clip to watch. It is a little over a minute from Shay on X. She says, saying the Jews killed Jesus is like saying Americans killed Abraham Lincoln. This absurd hypocrisy is uniquely applied to Jews, where she goes in and says, look, it was actually the Romans who killed Jesus. Of course, anyone in biblical studies recognizes that it was not the Jewish as a whole of the first century which was responsible for Yeshua's death. It was various Jewish religious leaders who were threatened by the Messiah's ministry. They are the ones who saw that false accusations were made against him and that the Romans executed him. We also know from the scriptures that it was the powers of the age who crucified the Messiah. So what this signals, of course, is that today's Messianic community needs to get on its game and be able to acknowledge that it was the collective sin of all of humanity which nailed Yeshua to the tree. And it involved Jews and it involved non-Jews. But of course, because of rising anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, you're going to see a lot more people, the Jews killed Jesus, and Christians, true to the scriptures, have no business supporting Jews or supporting Judaism or Israel. You're going to see that on the rise. Okay, from open source intel, and this is from this morning, September the 28th, 2:59. Sorry, this is from yesterday, September the 28th, yesterday afternoon. Axios reports Trump says his 21-point Gaza plan is in its final stages, claiming Netanyahu backs it. And scrolling down, the plan drafted by Kushner and Witkoff with input from Tony Blair calls for destroying Hamas's heavy weapons and tunnels as part of Gaza's demilitarization. Okay, so putting this as part of the development of the 21-point plan and how it's going to work or not work. Still have a number of stories from the weekend. From Visegrad 24, September the 28th, yesterday, J.D. Vance says that the Russians are losing a lot of soldiers and don't have much to show for it. He also says that the Russians are refusing bilateral meetings with Ukraine and trilateral meetings with the USA and Ukraine to hammer out a peace deal. Russia refuses to stop the war. That's a 27-second clip. Okay, so here is a story. Yes. Okay, so here is a story from the Jerusalem Post, the 28th of September. So this is yesterday. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, says West Bank belongs to Israel after Trump's opposition to annexation. Johnson told Tony Perkins that while there's a lot to resolve, he views Judea and Samaria as belonging to Israel. And indeed, there are going to be a lot of people, a lot of conservatives here in the U.S. who share that opinion. And part, at least, having open discussion and debate about the Middle East is, what do you do with people who hold to a highly biblical worldview that Judea and Samaria is part of the Jewish homeland, the promised land, the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yes, we want to have a biblical worldview, but that also involves having a worldview about end time events, having a worldview about what is supposed to transpire in the days leading up to the Messiah's return. And I think a lot of people have taken their eyes off the ball regarding that. And I would speculate that someone like Mike Johnson, and I appreciate a lot of the work he's done in the House of Representatives, he adheres to a dispensational pre-trib scenario. I don't, but there's going to come a point where what takes place regarding the land of Israel, yes, as painful as it is to see it happen, it's supposed to happen as we approach the days of the final tribulation and the return of Messiah. All right, if I counted everything up right, we have 10, so we're going to try to get through these quickly. From Open Source Intel Defender yesterday, September the 28th, in an interview earlier today with Reuters, President Donald J. Trump said regarding Tuesday's unprecedented last-minute meeting of nearly all generals and admirals in the U.S. Armed Forces at Quantico, Virginia, ordered last week by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. I want to tell the generals that we love them, their cherished leaders, to be strong, be tough, and be smart, and be compassionate, adding, that's all that it is, esprit de corps. It's about time somebody did that. So yes, there are people who think that this is just going to be some big giant pep rally for the U.S. military. Somehow, I think it's going to be a little more than that. I mean, why spend all that money? Why have all these flag officers come from different corners of the globe? But we obviously have to wait till tomorrow to see what it all involves. Open Intel Defender yesterday evening, September 28th. U.S. President Donald J. Trump, this goes back to what we reported earlier, has authorized Ukraine to carry out long-range drone and missile strikes against targets inside Russia, though some strikes will require additional approval from the Pentagon, White House Special Envoy Keith Kellogg has told Fox News. Okay, so earlier, Ukraine might have access to U.S. missile technology to reach deep inside Russia. Now, looks like they're going to be able to do it, but they might have to get special permission from time to time. And indeed, you have to remember, the Russian government considers that it is already engaged in a conflict with NATO and Europe. Okay, I haven't really looked into this story as much, but it is noteworthy. So you probably have seen this in various forms. Open Source Intel Defender yesterday, the 28th of September. What remains of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc Township, Michigan, after today's attacks in which the suspect rammed his truck into the front door before opening fire and setting ablaze the Mormon church? And a number of evangelicals have rightfully said, look, you may have significant theological disagreements with Mormonism, with the LDS. That's not the point here. The point is that there were people who were murdered. You need to pray for their families. You need to pray that they are comforted. And you need to pray that something like this doesn't happen again. To which I would say, amen. And that's the most important thing right now, because this is the kind of thing which could happen elsewhere. How many people, as twisted and as sick as they are, they see something like this and they get inspired to go do this in another place. From the 28th of September, Fox News, so this is from yesterday. there's a 33-second clip. Free our hostages. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the 21-point peace plan for ending the Gaza war ahead of his meeting with President Trump at the White House on Monday. And once again, yes, we're going to have to sort through the reactions to the Trump-Netanyahu meeting, which was going on before we went live today. All right, here's a post I ran across on X from last night. Some of you all know Michael Savage, the Savage Nation. He is a Jewish person. He's got a radio show, in piecemeal over the years. This is a just over 3-minute clip. It would be worthwhile for you to watch this. Candace Owens praises Michael Savage, who then goes scorched earth on her and her grift. And he uses a lot of profanity, Candace Owens, saying that she's using a lot of the same type of argumentation against the Jewish community, against Israel, which the Nazi Party used against the Jewish community in the 1930s. He was absolutely livid. And yes, there is profanity in it. Visegrad 24, this is a clip from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. This is from this morning, September the 29th. We're in an age of confrontation, which we didn't seek. It was contrived in capitals working to undermine us. Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, and Tehran. Russia brought war back to Europe and teamed up with China, North Korea, and Iran to expand their capabilities. Yeah, the war, when you go to your local Messianic congregation's Yom Kippur service, yes, pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, full release of the hostages. Pray for peace in the world. It's a legitimate thing God's people can pray for. Along with that, here's a report from open source intel today, the 9th. Pentagon sounds alarm on low missile stockpiles for potential China clash, urging suppliers to double or quadruple production, Wall Street Journal. So the U.S. military has a low missile stockpile. So different defense contractors, companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, among others, they're being encouraged. We need more missiles. We need more ordnance. Yeah, that's concerning. And here it's potential China clash mentioned. Okay, from End Time Headlines, this is from today. Over 200 evangelical leaders urge Trump to support Israel's sovereignty over the biblical heartland. Okay, and there are going to be a lot of people in the Christian world. They see this 21-point plan. They see how it's going to be implemented or not implemented, and they're going to come to diverse conclusions regarding the effects of it on the United States. And this is where I stress, look, if you believe we're in the last days, don't be surprised when you see some of these things. And look, as a believer, you are a citizen of heaven. So if you think America is going to be negatively affected by it, then pray for special protection for you, your family, and your local faith community. And God will grant it, no different than how he granted protection to the first century believers living in the Roman Empire. Okay, here's one. This is from Protestia today, September the 29th. Even though the video, 1 minute, 52 seconds, was from September the 13th. During Prestonwood Baptist Church, September 13th service, Prestonwood Baptist, it's in our backyard here in the DFW Metroplex. Pastor Jack Graham introduced an AI version of Charlie Kirk speaking from beyond the grave, telling his congregants, I want you to hear what Charlie is saying regarding what happened to him earlier this week. Okay, so yeah, this is something which actually has a number of people concerned. Not that the death of Charlie Kirk isn't something we should remember or take note of. It is something we should remember, and it is something we should take note of. But an AI version of Charlie Kirk, why? Especially now learning that there are probably hundreds of hours of video and interviews which have yet to be released with Charlie Kirk. This is the kind of thing which can lead and can facilitate Kirkolatry. And Kirkolatry is something we've got to guard against when you honor someone who has had a positive impact on our country. Okay, and then finally, and we're just going to post this to acknowledge that Netanyahu arrives at the White House for his meeting with Trump. Open source intel, and there's a 43-second clip. So we will obviously have to be sorting through the Trump-Netanyahu meeting tomorrow and how various people have responded to it. Because right now, when are we? We are in the middle of the 10 days of awe between Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur begins Wednesday evening. It is a fast day. It is a day to really come before the Lord individually, corporately. Yes, repent sins. And as believers, we do have the final sacrifice of Yeshua on the tree. But it's also a time to pray for the lost, pray for peace in the world, and pray for direction regarding what we are seeing in Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, etc. This is not a time to just ignore these things and to act like we're in this tiny little bubble, which I know, I'm sorry to say, a lot of Messianic people are acting like none of this is going on, or they're waiting for their leaders to step up and at least mention, look, this week a few things have happened, which I'm sure you're concerned about. I'm concerned about them, and we know God is in control, and we just need to pray that the Lord would give us his divine peace, his shalom, that we can stay grounded, but that we can be realistic about the signs of the times. That is why this year started right after Passover. Messianic Insider has gone 5 times a week. Now, we do have Yom Kippur this week, so the plan is we're going to have Messianic Insider tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday. We're not going to have a Messianic Insider, but I plan to have a McKee moment post like I did for Rosh Hashanah. Friday, we should have Messianic Insider. And then after that, for the week of Sukkot, I'm going to be at an undisclosed location. I'm planning to do McKee moments there. And then the week after Sukkot, we'll be going back 5 times a week. So just pencil that in. And I'm not going to fall off the earth, but we are in the middle of the fall high holidays. And of course, I need to get some rest, as I'm sure many of you do as well. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not already, please do visit our website, MessianicApologetics.net, where you can access a wide amount of free articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can look at some of the back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, and you can look at some of our other adventures and activities over the years. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.